On the 13th of July 1793, the revolutionary and Jacobin leader Jean-Paul Marat was assassinated as he lay in his bathtub. This was shocking enough for the citizens of Paris, but more than this, that the murder had been carried out by a woman, a minor noblewoman from Caen. That woman was Charlotte Corday. Her full name was Marie-Anne Charlotte de Corday d'Aumont, and she was born on the 27th of July in 1768 in Saint-Saturnin-de-Lignery in Normandy. She was born into a minor aristocratic family. This meant that while they were not as affluent as the higher nobility, they would still have lived comfortably and probably owned local lands. Her father had a short military career before returning home and marrying his cousin. They would have 3 daughters, of which Charlotte was the second. Sadly, when she was still young, her elder sister and mother died. Unable to cope with looking after 2 young daughters alone, their father sent them for their education to the Abbaye aux Dames convent in Caen. The French crown had a special fund for impoverished families of minor nobility, and this allowed the 2 girls to receive an education suitable for young aristocratic ladies. It was also where Charlotte was introduced to the writings of Plutarch, Rousseau, and Voltaire in the convent's library. These would shape and influence her thinking and personality, and was the beginning of her ideas about politics in society. When Charlotte came of age in February 1791, she left the convent to live with her aunt, who also resided in Caen, Madame Le Costelier de Bretteville-Gouville. The 2 women became close, and Charlotte would later become the heir to her aunt's estate. It was at this time Charlotte also began to read Corday, her great-great-grandfather and renowned playwright, and began to see in herself many of the qualities of Corneille's heroines, of being virtuous and courageous. Charlotte also admired many of the Enlightenment philosophers, likening their ideas to those of the Greek democracy. Madame Le Costelier was an ardent royalist, whereas her niece felt the royals were nice people, but not suited for the job. While in Caen, Charlotte would have seen the extreme poverty and famine that plagued the poor of France, even in her rural area. The ordinary people of France were desperate by this point, and the only way they could change anything was to beg for assistance. By September 1792, events reached a crisis point, and the September massacres took place. These were a series of killings that took place between the 2nd and the 6th of September. Charlotte was horrified by the unbridled violence and lost one of her friends, Wajagao de Mangret. The September massacres were a violent reaction to the prisoners who had been rounded up by the surveillance committee set up by the Jacobins. The prisoners included anyone who represented counter-revolutionary activities, including priests, nobles, and anyone connected with the royal family, such as the Princess de Lamballe, famously one of the first victims. This was presented as a response for the revolutionaries who died in the storming of the Tuileries on the 10th of August 1792, but was likely also a cold and calculated plan that was born of the fury people felt for their problems being ignored for so long. Jean-Paul Marat was the first to suggest organising groups of prisoners to be massacred, working alongside his Committee of Surveillance of the Commune to round up around 4,000 people. After rejecting plans, also suggested by Marat, to burn large groups of them alive, it was instead the suggestion of Bilal Varenne to butcher them. After the massacres, a circular was published asking all patriotic French in rural areas to rise up to defend their country against the coming Prussian threat. But before taking up arms and leaving their homes, it was suggested they rid themselves of all counter-revolutionaries. The violence in Caen was very likely to have been connected to this. We don't know if this was the trigger for Charlotte, but on the 9th of July 1793, she set off on a one-way trip to Paris. She was carrying a copy of Plutarch's Parallel Lives, a book intended to showcase virtues alongside failings. The hidden nature of her visit started with Charlotte telling her father that she was in fact taking a trip to England. She took a room at Hôtel de Providence, already planning the murder of Marat. Jean-Paul Marat had risen through the ranks of the revolutionaries through his political ideas. Long before he was part of the Jacobins, Marat had written works criticising elements of the British Constitution when he lived in Newcastle upon Tyne in England, and on prison reform. He moved back to France studying medicine and science. Giving up a career as a scientist and doctor when the French Revolution started, Marat instead became a journalist, writing on behalf of the ordinary citizens of France. On the 12th of September 1789, Marat began his own newspaper, originally titled Publiciste Parisien, before changing it just a few days later to L'Ami du Peuple, or The Friend of the People. Marat used his paper to criticize the most important people or groups who were working against, as he saw it, the revolution. In 1790, he attacked Jacques Necker, Louis XVI's popular finance minister, and was nearly arrested for it. Other people began to copy his paper, forcing him to call on the police to catch the fraudsters, leaving him as the only voice of the friend of the people. Marat also poured venom on the revolutionary leaders he didn't feel were going far enough, urging for more extreme action against the monarchy. Marat only became publicly known on the 10th of August with the storming of the Tuileries. Marat's Committee of Surveillance of the Commune published the circular that called for the rounding up and killing of counter-revolutionary enemies of France. While Marat's actual part in the massacres that came next is debatable, certainly he and his committee took control of what was already happening. At least Charlotte personally believed Marat was to blame for the way the revolution was going, and she had decided that killing him was the only way to prevent further bloodshed. She also believed it would prevent an all-out civil war, and that Marat was threatening the delicate beginnings of the Republic. From her room in the Hôtel de Providence, Charlotte wrote out her Address to the French, Friends of Law and Peace. This was a document which outlined her reasons for assassinating Marat, and her hopes for the peace that would follow his death. Her original plan was to kill Marat in front of the National Convention, the constituent assembly of France from the creation of its first republic. Her aim was to make an example of him, but she soon found out this wasn't going to be possible. Marat suffered from a severe skin condition, which was possibly dermatitis herpetiformis, an autoimmune condition that blisters the skin in response to celiac disease. His health was deteriorating due to this condition, and he now rarely went out, conducting most of his business with other people from a bathtub. Charlotte changed her plans accordingly. Her mood towards Marat was probably worsened still by his latest achievement, in helping the downfall of the Girondins on the 2nd of June. As a sympathiser of the Girondins, it was probably just more fuel for the fury that Charlotte felt. However, although it probably would have done little to prevent Charlotte taking the path she did, Marat was now actually far less important than she had given him credit for. With the Girondins now out of the way, the Montagnards, namely Robespierre and others leading the group, no longer needed Marat or the Jacobins' support. They began to distance themselves, and most of his letters to the National Convention were ignored. On the 13th of July, sometime in the morning, Charlotte made her way to Marat's home with a plan. The day was stiflingly hot, and she would have passed citizens sipping cool lemonade, as well as tricolour ribbons and emblems decorating pillars and doorways. She stopped along the way to purchase a new hat, replacing her white bonnet for a black one with green ribbons. With this act, she would unknowingly make green the colour that represented counter-revolutionary activities. Then, Charlotte made her way to a cutler's shop, purchasing a large 5-inch long kitchen knife, which she slipped unseen into her corset. Marat was known to allow in anyone who offered help or information for the revolution, and Charlotte decided to play on this. Charlotte's nervousness is shown, however, through the fact that it was almost midday by the time she reached his door. She might have walked the streets for a while, building up her nerves to do the deed. The door was answered by his sister-in-law, Catherine Evra. Marat was married to Simone Evra in a common-law marriage when he was 49 and she was 26. Catherine was immediately suspicious of Charlotte, who claimed to have the names of several Girondists in Cannes who were planning an uprising. Not certain about the woman at her brother-in-law's door, Catherine sent her away. Undeterred, Charlotte simply returned that evening around 7 p.m, and this time she gained entry. Her arrival coincided with the bread and newspapers delivery, and so Charlotte gained entrance up the stairs without knocking. Simone, Marat's wife, stopped Charlotte on the stairs and questioned her, as she was uncertain about Charlotte as her sister had been. The would-be assassin raised her voice so that Marat could hear her, stating she had information, and so Marat shouted down that she should be let in. It's likely her promise of information of a Girondin uprising was important to Marat due to his diminishing importance. If he could show the Girondins was still a threat, he might still be valuable as support against them. Charlotte was granted an audience with Marat as he took his medicinal bath, a board laid over the top of the bathtub to form a desk. It's not hard to imagine how unassuming Charlotte must have appeared. Women would not have been considered as assassins, spies perhaps, or messengers, but not murderers for a political cause. She sat down and the interview took place, lasting around 15 minutes or so. This was due to Simone being present at the interview, until Marat asked her to go and fetch some more kaolin solution for his bath. Marat asked Charlotte what had happened in Cannes, and Charlotte probably told him at least some of the truth. But then she claimed to have a list of Girondists who were planning to rise up in retaliation for what had happened in Paris. He wrote the names down and Charlotte embellished them with invented details. Finally, Marat finished writing his list and declared, "Their heads will fall within a fortnight." Charlotte later changed this statement at her trial to, "Soon I shall have them all guillotined in Paris." At the moment Simone left to fetch the solution for the bath, Charlotte stood up from her chair, pulled out the long kitchen knife from within her corset, and stabbed it into Marat's chest. Her blade went under his right clavicle, opening the brachiocephalic artery close to his heart. The bleeding was instant and fast, and it's likely Marat died within minutes. He cried out to Simone, "Aidez-moi, ma chère amie, help me, my love," and slumped backwards, dying almost instantly. Simone rushed into the room, followed by one of Marat's colleagues from The Friend of the People. Simone cried out, "My God, he has been assassinated!" looking over at Charlotte and adding, "Marie-Rousse, what have you done?" The colleague threw a chair at Charlotte and held her down. Roused by the yelling and screaming from Marat's apartment, neighbours piled in, including a military surgeon and a dentist. They tried to revive Marat, but unsurprisingly, to no avail. Charlotte had succeeded in killing her target. Charlotte was surprisingly impassive. She appeared to have no urge to get away and seemed only to want to explain her motives for the crime. To the local commissaire de police, a man named Goulard, Charlotte said, having seen that civil war was on the point of exploding throughout France, and persuaded that Marat was the principal author of this disaster, she had wished to sacrifice her life for her country. 6 further officials came to the apartment to poke about and investigate, and to these, Charlotte confirmed she indeed came from Caen, but to their disappointment, that the idea was hers alone. The officials preferred the idea that the assassination had been planned by a group of Girondists, and the truth that Charlotte, a woman, had planned this on her own seemed absurd to them. News of Marat's death spread quickly, and the crowds of Saint-Germain were nearly hysterical for Charlotte's blood. The officials had great difficulty from stopping the crowd from tearing her apart on the spot, only calming them by reminding them that they would be unable to find out any of the others they believed were part of the crime if Charlotte was killed. She was taken to the Abbaye prison, into a small cell with a straw mattress. She wrote a letter to the convention, protesting against the rumoured arrest of Claude Fauchet, a Girondin deputy and constitutional bishop of Caen. It was hinted that they had been in partnership, and Charlotte stressed that not only had they never spoken, but that she found Fauchet a fanatic with no firmness of character, and she didn't respect him at all. Many times throughout the investigation, Charlotte would stress how the idea that a woman was incapable of what she had done had played to her advantage, and she was proud to prove that women were in fact capable of patriotic violence. Charlotte underwent 3 separate cross-examinations, each with the intent of establishing that she was part of a wider Girondist conspiracy. With the strength of truth on her side, Charlotte denied these allegations, holding to the fact she had planned it alone. She stated that Marat was, in her opinion, a hoarder and a monster, and that she had killed one man to save 100,000. When asked if she had practiced the killing blow, Charlotte became visibly upset, protesting she was no murderer, and that it had simply been luck killing Marat with one stroke. Charlotte also insisted not only was she a Republican, but she had been one even before the revolution, citing examples from ancient Rome and Greece. The president of the Revolutionary Tribunal, Montaigne, who conducted 2 of her examinations, asked Charlotte, "Do you think you have killed all the Marat?" Charlotte answered steadily, "With this one dead, the others, perhaps, will be afraid." She was convicted and condemned to death, and was transferred to the conciergerie to await her execution. While there, she was permitted to write 2 letters. One was to Charles Barbaroux, a politician and Girondin, stating her hope that more patriots would follow her example. The second letter was to her father, in which she begged his forgiveness for doing away with her life without his permission. She also asked him and her family to be happy, as she had died for a greater cause, and that she felt she had saved many lives. The morning of her execution, Charlotte asked if she could have her portrait painted. During the case, she had noticed a young National Guard officer, Jean-Jacques Hauer, sketching her likeness, and she was given permission for him to complete it into a painting. Hauer entered her cell and completed the portrait in 2 hours, with Charlotte only interrupting to make suggestions. The portrait shows her with blonde hair, despite many other contemporary portraits showing her with brunette hair and her passport describing her hair as chestnut. It was important for Howard that he presented Charlotte as a vain aristocrat and counter-revolutionary, and so he made it look in the painting as though she had taken time to powder her hair, lightening it. When sitter and artist were interrupted by the executioner, Charlotte took a pair of scissors and snipped off a lock of her hair, offering it to Howard as a souvenir of a poor dying woman. It was early evening on the 17th of July 1793, and Charlotte entered the tumbril that would take her to the place of execution alone, refusing the services of a priest. She didn't even sit down, instead choosing to stand and balance herself by resting her knees against the wooden seat. A large crowd had gathered to see her die, and her red shirt, worn to show she was an assassin of representatives of the people, was soaked through as a sudden summer storm passed overhead. Charlotte was calm as she was led to the guillotine. She died quietly, her head separated from her body. Before anyone in the crowd could react, a man named Legros, a carpenter who had been hired to make repairs to the guillotine, picked up Charlotte's head from the basket below and slapped her cheek. Despite what Charlotte had done, the offence against a woman who had just been executed was deemed horrendous, and Legros spent 3 months in prison for it. An autopsy was also planned for after her death, to prove that she was not a virgin. What does that have to do with an assassination, right? Well, they wanted to prove that Charlotte had been sleeping with someone who helped her plan the death of Marat, and they were sorely disappointed when it was proven she was in fact a virgin. She was finally buried in the Chapelle Expiatoire in the 8th arrondissement of Paris. However, her wish that the bloodiness of the revolution be halted never happened. In fact, it grew worse. In the wake of his death, although in life he had been dwindling in importance, Marat became a glorified figure, a man who had given his life for the Republic. Drawing upon the drama of it all, artist Jacques-Louis David was asked to design an elaborate and grand funeral, and also to create a painting that would do Marat justice. Marat's cadaver was already rotting in the intense midsummer heat, and so the embalmers had to work quickly, placing his body into the pose David deemed necessary. It was said that the arm that holds the iron pen in the painting, a symbol of his tireless work for the Republic and its citizens, had to be replaced with the arm from another body due to a fracture. There was horror one morning when it was found to have fallen off to the floor, and his wound had to be partially stitched up so as not to create too much revulsion for the viewer. David's final image of Marat portrayed him as a wounded hero of the revolution, tirelessly working for the people in the grand posture of an ancient Roman, spilling his blood only for France. His funeral was attended by the entire National Convention, and he was buried in the garden of the former Club des Cordeliers. An exhibition was set up in the church there beforehand to show his body to devotees, including Marat's writings, and Marat himself was placed on a bed lined with tricolour banners and ribbons, a circle of flowers on his brow. Also shown was his unusual shoe-shaped bath, his bloody robe, and his desk. In the elegy for his funeral, Marat was likened to Jesus for loving the people and hating kings, nobles, priests and rogues. If it seemed somewhat cult-like, Marat did indeed become a cult-like figure in the days to come. When the Jacobins began to do away with religion, instead replacing it with the cult of reason and cult of supreme being, Marat was viewed as something like a saint, his bust often replacing crucifixes. On the 19th of November, the port city of Le Havre de Grace would change its name to Le Havre Marat, and Montmartre became Montmarat. A bronze sculpture of him was created and placed in Parc des Buttes-Chaumont. Charlotte Corday's act, far from diminishing Marat, had only made him shine brighter. The terror would also grow in intensity after Marat's death. His assassination was a powerful piece of propaganda for the Jacobin revolutionaries. His death proved, it seemed, that the revolutionary dictatorship Marat had emphasized had to be put in place, and to follow his ideas, however extreme, were the mark of purity for the Republic. It wouldn't be until after the Thermidorian reaction that Marat's reputation would crumble, his glorified death no longer needed after the fall of Robespierre. As for Charlotte, even if she was not successful in her ultimate goal through assassinating Marat, she changed views on the position of women politically. Her killing was considered masculine, but she had proven that a woman was capable of forming her own ideas about the Republic, of planning a political murder, and of actually doing it alone. Female revolutionaries distanced themselves from Charlotte, fearful that her act would jeopardize their growing feminist movement. Those who agreed with what she had done wrote poems about her in glowing terms, some of them being arrested after her death. As late as 1847, Alphonse de Lamartine wrote his Histoire des Girondines and dedicated part of the series to her, giving her the nickname the Angel of Assassination. Regardless of how successful Charlotte was in her endeavour or how she was regarded, it cannot be denied that she changed the way women were viewed in their personal agency and in the strength of their own convictions. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any new documentaries.